Hello, and welcome to a Clinical Trials Day Facebook Live Q&A. I'm Amy, PR specialist at VCU Massey Cancer Center, and today is International Clinical Trials Day, which is celebrated around the world to recognize the day that Scottish physician James Lind started what is often considered to be the first clinical trial aboard a ship on May 20th, 1747. To mark the occasion, I'll be asking questions about clinical trials of two physicians who lead clinical trials. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Sarah Gordon, who is a medical oncologist and clinical researcher at VCU Massey Cancer Center, and Dr. Arun Sanyal, who is a hepatologist at VCU Health, an associate director at the Wright Center for Clinical and Translational Research, and a Massey researcher. Drs. Gordon and Sanyal, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
I do want to start with just a basic question, just to kick off the conversation. Dr. Gordon, tell us, what is a clinical trial exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So a clinical trial, it's a research study involving patients that we use to find better ways to diagnose, prevent, or treat diseases, usually using either a new drug or a new device or a new combination of drugs. And trials are really designed to help doctors tell if a new treatment works and is it safe. We use it quite often in oncology to try and find better treatments for our patients. Millions of patients have taken part in this kind of research, and this is really how we find new drugs and new treatments to make advances for our patients and for our patients to do better.
Dr. Sanyal, who can participate in clinical trials?
Well, the short answer is everyone, because there are many clinical trials. And within each clinical trial, there is a specific scientific question that is posed. And depending on the question that is posed, we may need normal, healthy individuals to participate, or it could be people who have certain types of diseases or certain severity of a given disease. So virtually any disease and all the way from being completely healthy to being incredibly sick throughout the life cycle of the human being, at every stage, there are potential opportunities to participate in research. And I really want to make the point that at the end of the day, if we want to learn about how the human body behaves and how to improve the human state, there's no better way to study and understand this than to study humans. And there's no getting around, the need for humans to participate in clinical trials to generate the evidence base and the scientific rigor that we can then use to actually make recommendations for the treatment of patients worldwide.
And Dr. Sanyal, just expanding upon that just a bit, there's been a lot of conversation about not just getting humans in clinical trials, but some diverse humans in clinical trials. Why is it so important to have women and people of color participate in clinical trials?
Well, simply because our society is not made up of just one type of people. While we are all human beings, we are all actually quite diverse in terms of our genetic makeup, the type of foods we eat, our environmental exposures, and many diseases result because of an interaction between our genetics and our environment. And so depending on what the unique crosstalk between our genes and our environment actually is, the disease may manifest differently and respond differently to treatments. So it is extremely important as we develop therapies, particularly for common disorders or very serious disorders, that we need to make sure that the therapies work equally well in all of these different communities, because as a medical community, we have a responsibility to all of the communities that make up our society.
Dr. Gordon, are clinical trials safe? Clinical trials are very safe. The patients who are enrolled on clinical trials are monitored very closely, and there's usually a whole team of people monitoring these patients. So it involves the doctors who are taking care of the patients, specific research nurses, and so those are the team members who have kind of their hands on the patient, monitoring them, making sure that they're doing well. And here we're in constant constant contact with our patients when they're on clinical trials. Any little thing, we want to know about what's going on so we can make sure that the patients are doing well. In addition to that, there's also regulatory oversight. There's research kind of boards that meet both to make sure that trials are ethical and that they're safe for patients to go on. And then trials are continually monitored by outside boards and groups of people who are looking at data, making sure that there's no unexpected events, that patients are safe and doing well. And so there's actually a lot of rigor and oversight into all of our clinical trials.
Dr. Gordon, one concern that patients always have is cost. Does insurance cover clinical trials?
Yeah, so that's a great question and something that we run into all the time with our patients. Fortunately, the majority of insurance companies do cover clinical trials. And so, you know, if there's a new aspect to a clinical trial, something that's investigational, a new drug perhaps, or a biopsy that needs to be done specifically because of the clinical trial, oftentimes that cost is covered by the clinical trial. So there's no additional cost to the patient. And then other things such as seeing your doctor or routine testing that you would have done, whether you're on a clinical trial or not, insurance companies cover those costs. And whenever a patient enrolls on a clinical trial, we always make sure to check with insurance companies beforehand to get prior authorization to ensure that the treatments will be covered and that patients are able to participate without any additional financial burden to them.
Dr. Sanyal, how do people find out about what clinical trials are open for enrolling right now? I know that there are more than 300 right now, VCU and VCU Health.
Yeah, so that's another fantastic question because it can be challenging to navigate through all of the trials that are available. But there are resources available through the Massey website as well as through the Wright Center for Clinical Research, where one can get a listing. And certainly, I think for anyone who would like to find out if there are trials for themselves or for a loved one, particularly if they have a cancer of some sort, they can call the Massey Center and they would get triaged and directed to the appropriate physician or the department who might be able to guide them. Because sometimes even if we don't have a trial here, we may be able to refer them to a trial at the NIH or somewhere else that we are aware of. So, you know, the medical community, by and large, the academic medical community, I think, by and large, is very committed to this idea. And so physicians are not, turf-minded where they just want to keep all the patients for themselves. If there's a way to help the patient, and if I don't have something to offer, I try to find someone else who may have something to offer the patient.
Dr. Sanyal, can someone opt out if they decide that they no longer want to participate? And does their medical care change if they are in a clinical trial than it would if they were not enrolled?
So first, the answer to the first part is yes. I mean, at any point from the time of, when they're approached for a trial and then before they sign a consent, even after signing a consent, they can opt out because it's a voluntary thing. And if patients feel uncomfortable, they can opt out. Now, in each setting, you have to put this in context. For example, if you were in a trial of a vaccination, right? COVID, we are living in the era of COVID, and this is very topical. Once the shot is in your arm, you may opt out of the trial, but the shot is still in your arm. The shot cannot be taken out of your arm. So it all has to be sort of kept in context. But yes, anyone can opt out of any trial at any point in time. And legally and ethically, the medical care that they're supposed to receive, regardless of their participation in the trial, should not change. In fact, we make a big deal out of making sure patients understand their participation or decision not to participate in a trial will not impact the quality and the intensity of the care, from all the way from the humane elements of the care to the technical elements of the care that they receive at our center. And I'm pretty sure This is true for research centers all around the country. Looks like we may have lost Amy.
You know, I think echoing what you were saying, Dr.
Hi, my name is Melissa Mitchell. I'm in the communications team. I think we lost connection with Amy. I think she's going to try to reconnect right now. She's coming back. So, you know, we'll hang out for a minute and okay, she's back.
There she is.
Hi, sorry about that. Sometimes technology is not foolproof, and sometimes your computer says that it wants to update something and shuts off right in the middle of a fantastic discussion. So here we go. I'm gonna get back going on because we're glad that we have so many people who are participating and watching us today. And we did have a question that came in. And it is, are placebos used in trials? Dr. Gordon, I will ask you.
Yeah, so that's a very important question and something that comes up a lot in our discussions and the discussions I have with patients. One thing I want to emphasize specifically about oncology trials is we almost never have a placebo trial in oncology. So in oncology, patients are always getting at least what is the best standard of care. So if you have cancer, you are getting cancer treatments. You're never getting kind of a fake treatment. Oftentimes, you know, what we're looking at in clinical trials is what's the current standard of treatment, and then compare that to standard of treatment plus something else or an alternative treatment that we think, and we have data from the laboratory and from earlier trials that suggest this other treatment may actually be better than what the current standard treatment is. That is a little bit different in some other disease sites, or for example, if you're already free of cancer, sometimes more treatments aren't always better. And so additional drugs and therapies when the cancer is already gone, for example, may actually bring people more harm than good. And so then sometimes we do have placebo trials in that. It's a great question, and you should always talk with your doctor about that. Never be afraid to ask that question. And like I said, anytime that there's an active problem in oncology, we're always making sure that patients are at least getting the standard of care treatment and possibly even one that may be better than the standard of care.
We have another question coming in from the audience. How long do trials typically last, Dr. Gordon?
Yeah, so generally what I talk with my patients is a clinical trial, you may remain on a treatment, you know, as long as the treatment is successful, so it's doing what we hope it will, as long as the patient is tolerating it okay, and then as long as the patient wants to remain on it. So as Dr. Sanyal had talked about, a patient may stop the clinical trial at any point. That's often the trials that we see in oncology. Some trials, there is a more finite period of time, right, where a treatment may be for a certain period, and then you stop the treatment and you're monitored. And so when your health team and doctors are talking to you about clinical trials, it's important to find out for that specific trial, how long would it be, what the follow-up would be like, because it can change depending on each individual trial.
Dr. Gordon, right now you're leading 15 clinical trials, correct?
Correct, yeah. So I'm the lead for 15 clinical trials here. I see primarily patients with lung cancer, and so most of my trials are in lung cancer. I also have some trials for our patients with head and neck cancer, or some GYN malignancies like ovarian cancer. And then another part of the work that I do is in what we call early phase clinical trials. So that's when we're looking at new drugs, new treatments, or new combinations of treatments. And so I'm leading some clinical trials, what we call phase 1 trials, looking at these new combination treatments that patient with any kinds of cancer can enroll in.
And Dr. Sanyal, one drug that a lot of people are familiar with now is Ronda Severe. Tell us about your participation in that clinical trial.
Well, when we saw the COVID epidemic sort of sweep from Asia to Europe, it became very clear that we were not going to escape COVID. And unfortunately, we really did not see evidence of a well-orchestrated public health response as this was happening. So it became very clear to me that we would be left on our own to sort of figure out a solution for our patients and our communities right here in Richmond and in Virginia. And I did a quick search of what was being used. And of those, it seemed like a direct antiviral because you have a viral infection and you had that was the direct antiviral, and of the antiviral drugs, that seemed the most promising based on whatever little data was available. And we have done in liver diseases a lot of studies treating viral hepatitis like hepatitis C, which used to be a disease that used to kill with great certainty over a course of 10, 20 years with progression to cirrhosis and liver cancer, which today we can cure in 99 to 100% of people around the world. And we were involved in many of the trials that led to that development. So we worked with the companies that did that developed these antivirals, and we have a long-lasting relationship with them. So I reached out to them and told them that VCU was the primary health provider for a large segment of the community here in Central Virginia, and that if they would provide the drug to us and at that time the drug was not approved. So a clinical trial was ongoing to really establish whether it worked or not. And so we came on as a site for that trial. And we enrolled about 70 or 80 patients into that trial. And, it's the results of those trials that eventually led to the approval of the drug. And this is sort of part of the mainstay of treatment worldwide. So thanks to the research and the participation of the patients who actually received the drug over here, the benefits were reaped by many millions around the world, so there is that multiplier effect when you actually do the right science, generate the data to say what works, what doesn't work. So that's a sort of a great example of how sort of being proactive really helped us out over here, and the trials that were, and the patients who participated in it really contributed not only to their own recovery, but also to the welfare of the human race in a larger scale.
That proactivity is so important to the process. Dr. Gordon, what are some other reasons why clinical trials are so important right now?
For us in oncology, clinical trials bring us hope, right? So they bring us the new treatments that are going to help our patients to live longer, to do better, to have more time with their families. And that's how I look at it. It's important to remember sometimes clinical trials are viewed as something that you do kind of as a last resort, right? When there's nothing left. But that's not true anymore. We're finding new treatments. We're using these clinical trials sooner in order to have our patients do better, live longer. And like I said, they are part of what brings me so much hope in this work and when I work with my patients.
And this is a question for both of you, but I'll start with you, Dr. Gordon. As a physician, would you recommend clinical trials to your patients?
So I absolutely recommend clinical trials to my patients. And that's something that we talk about even in my first visit with them, because I think it's so important to look for every opportunity for what could be the next best treatment. And so we'll consider that at every point when my patients need to think about the next treatment. We look for clinical trials. It's something that I encourage all my patients to do. If we don't have the best clinical trial for them here, then we look for other clinical trials that they could potentially travel for. And then we have good discussions about what's the benefits of a clinical trial, when do we think about not going on clinical trials. But yeah, that's a part of every discussion. And I think, especially again, speaking as an oncologist and a cancer researcher, for our oncology patients, that's something that your doctor should be talking about with you. And if you ever feel like they're not, or you're afraid to ask a doctor, it's always appropriate to get a second opinion, to speak with somebody else, especially coming to an academic center like we have here at VCU Massey, to see what options there may be.
And Dr. Sanyal, same question
So let me share.
Would you recommend trials?
So let me share with you what I tell my patients, and that our goal is to have for our patients the longest duration of life and the best quality of life, right? So then we review with them what they have, what is the natural course of the disease, what can they expect, and what with the current best treatment, how far can we get to reaching that optimal longest duration and best quality of life. And if there is a big gap between what is normally expected for someone of that age and with all the other risk factors that they have, then we have a gap between our current care and where we want the care to be. And one option of trying to narrow that gap is to participate in clinical trials so that we can not only try to help the individual patient, but also to generate the evidence base to establish both the safety as well as the benefits of different types of interventions to reduce the gap between where we are and where we want to be.
And we have another question coming in from the audience right now. I'll ask you, Dr. Sanyal. Peter asks, can you suggest trial sites outside of VCU?
Sure. I mean, there are trial sites in many places, depends on the disease and what's going on. So there are trial sites at UVA in Charlottesville. I mean, that's probably one of the closest places where you have a lot of trials going on. There are trials in the DC area, particularly at the National Institutes of Health, which is the big federal research agency, and National Cancer Institute supports a lot of clinical trials in the cancer space. Hopkins, Duke, Chapel Hill, in the mid-Atlantic, this region, within a couple of 2 or 3 hours drive, there are a lot of very big medical centers doing a lot of trials.
Dr. Gordon, before we wrap up the conversation, are there any final words that you have to our audience today, or really just some encouragement about clinical trials? Because we're observing Clinical Trials Day today, but at Massey, it's every day.
Correct. Yes. And part of the care at Massey is really this comprehensive approach of taking care of the patient, taking care of their family, being very involved with our care team, including our doctors, our nurses, our social workers. And again, what I would encourage patients is don't be afraid of clinical trials. Don't worry if your doctor talks to you about clinical trials. Again, clinical trials bring us the greatest hope and the greatest opportunity for new and better treatments for our patients. And so you really want to be working with a doctor who's talking to you about clinical trials and making sure that they're giving you the opportunity to have access to that. And if for any reason the doctor's not doing that, don't be afraid to ask them, right? So as an oncologist, I want my patients to ask me questions. And if patients feel like they need a second opinion, that's okay too. Make sure you're seeking a second opinion at a large academic center, for example, like VCU Massey, where you have options for clinical trials. And don't worry about kind of your doctor's feelings being hurt. That's something that I hear often too, is, well, I don't want to hurt my doctor's feelings. None of us are hurt by our patients getting the best care. And sometimes we realize patients have to travel, whether it be coming to VCU or going to one of the centers that Dr. Sanyal had talked about. So really be sure you're having an engaged conversation with your doctor. And if you feel like you're not able to, maybe consider seeing another doctor that's more comfortable having those conversations.
Dr. Sanyal, any final words that you can leave with our audience?
I would echo what you just heard from Dr. Gordon. Do not be afraid of participating in a clinical trial. When your physician tells you that this is what you can expect with treatment and it doesn't seem like that's good enough, always ask, are there clinical trials? Can I get a better shot at goal, via participation in a clinical trial? And your physician should feel comfortable either talking to you about a trial or referring you to a site that is doing trials. And so, because trials give you an option of improving your own outcomes, at the same time, generating the science that helps the larger human cause. And so and establishes the safety so that of all of these. Now, there are individual nuances to individual trials, but that's what that one-on-one conversation with your physician will bring out. And then if you're comfortable with it and you feel you've had all your questions answered, then, it will help you, participate in the trial. Trial participation is essential for medical science to move forward, in both at an individual level and at a societal level.
Doctors Arun Sanyal and Sarah Gordon, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. It has been so interesting and so helpful. And I know everyone who has been watching today and will watch this as a recorded video has gained some knowledge that they can then take and make decisions for their own healthcare. So thank you so much for participating today. It's
our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Happy to talk about it.
Sure. Well, that wraps up our Clinical Trials Day Q&A. There are so many clinical trials, more than 300 available right now at VCU and VCU Health. And I just want to let you know that you can find them on Study here on the Wright Center for Clinical and Translational Research website. That's studyfinder.cctr.vcu.edu. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and be well.